Ladies and gentlemen, if you find a place to sit down, if you'd like to get started, welcome. We're so glad to see you here. It is, I'm at a loss for words about what to say about being able to finally, after more than 2 years, be able to be together in our lecture series that has been ongoing, as you know, for decades. As we get started, there's a few things that I'm going to ask you to, first of all, for those on Zoom and for the recording. Today is Tuesday, May 24th, 2022. I'm Steve Shields, president of Royal Asiatic Society of Korea. Please be patient with us as we try to figure out what we're doing with technology. There's bound to be hiccups, and we're really grateful for Mr. Cho and Leslie to be here tonight to help us try and sort out all the wiring and things, and we'll probably be fine. If you are here in the lecture hall tonight, please don't log into Zoom on your devices. If you are joining us on Zoom, please turn off your mics and your video feeds. That'll help preserve the bandwidth for us. We just don't know how well that's going to operate because this is a new to us room and system. When we get to our question time, we'll ask those of you on Zoom to please type your questions in the chat box. And our staff here will be monitoring that chat box and will help us get your questions posed to our speakers tonight. RAS Korea expresses sincere thanks to our generous patron, Asia Development Foundation. They've continued to support us for several years, and we appreciate all that they've done for us. We also appreciate our other donors. We have many. Big or small donations are always helpful for what we are trying to do. Tonight, if you are here in the lecture hall, we have several copies of the Korean Heritage magazine. There's 2 different issues on the table. They're free. Please feel free to take one or both. This is published quarterly by the Cultural Affairs Bureau of Korea. It's one of the most spectacularly beautiful and colorful magazines that you can get, even for lots of money, and it's free. So they give us several copies each issue that we want our members and friends to have. We're also selling copies of Called by Another Name. This book, written by David Dollinger and our very own Matt Van Valkenburg, is Dollinger's memoirs of his firsthand experience on May 18th and the subsequent days in Gwangju in 1980. See Joanne afterwards and you can get a copy of the book. We are joined tonight by 2 speakers, Miss Nix Lee and Miss Sihyun Ju. They're both students at Hanyang University. Are you both in the international studies? No, one's Miss Lee, your international studies, and your communications, Miss Ju. Is that right? Yeah. So their title is K-Gen Z, Depressed, Isolated, Confused with a K. If you know, you know. RAS Korea reminds you that lecture content does not necessarily reflect the opinions or positions of Royal Asiatic Society of Korea. So after the lecture, we'll have plenty of time for questions. I'm going to now ask Professor David Tizard to come and talk a little bit, tell us a little bit about his students and what they're doing with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And yes, it's good to be back in person. Ladies and gentlemen, I won't keep you long because I know you're not here to see me or to listen to me. But I'd just like to say one of the reasons behind putting this event on, and I'm very thankful to Steve and everyone else at the RAS that has allowed this to happen. about a year ago, I came across this very simple idea, and it's affected how I've approached a lot of my work. And the idea was this: don't speak about people, speak to people. And so rather than commentating on various people in society and things like that, I thought it was really important to speak to people, to listen to people and get those real first-hand interactions. And so that's something that I've been doing in a lot of my work since then. And it's that attitude which prompted this talk today. And so I'm sharing that attitude with you all here. You can listen to people, you can speak to people, and that's why Hyunjung and Sihyun are here. I hope it goes well. I have great faith in them. They're awesome. And I'll stop speaking now and I'll hand over this, make them feel warm.
Nervous. Thank you so much, Professor Tizard and President Director Shield and Sihyun for doing this with me. And I would also like to thank anyone and everyone who helped me through this process and letting me be here today. Thank you so much. So today, the topic Gen Z, if you know, you know. I will be discussing mental health in Korea in terms of Gen Z. So the first part, I will be talking about mental health. How is mental health perceived today? How do we access mental health facilities? Where is it? What are some issues? And who will you be meeting? And the second part is, what is still missing? Yes, so the perception of mental health today is that according to the Kihasa, which is affiliated with the Ministry of Health, they say that for Gen Z students, so for 청소년 and adults, they both perceive that going to mental health facilities is quite burdensome. 부담스럽다 is the word that they use. Up to 90% say that they may feel burdened to get help. And furthermore, the reasons for that is a fear of being admitted to the hospital. It will be on the records. You may not be able to get jobs. There's shame, privacy, money. So there are lots of contributing factors to why people may feel burdened to access help. And this is the media narrative that's going on right now. There's stigmatizing mental illness leads to high suicide rates, Korea neglecting mental health. These are all what is currently being talked about. But something is missing, or perhaps not talked about as much, which is that, again, from the same study, 청소년이 인식하는 정신건강 서비스 필요도. So Gen Z, or teenagers in general, up to 90%, or somewhere around 90% say that there needs to be mental health facilities. So there's this idea that, oh, it's taboo, we shouldn't talk about it. It's something that only you should know about. But then the same group of people say that there still needs to be mental health services. And I'm also adding in the one for adults too. So the age range is from 20, oh, it's not up there, sorry. Yeah, so from 20s to 60s, all of them, up to 80%, almost 90%, all say that there needs to be mental health services. So it's not just young people that's saying we need mental health services. It goes for the same for elders who may be more conservative. So again, this links back to the idea that there's this clash between taboo and what shouldn't be talked about, but we still need mental health services. Yeah, so this is actually a personal experience of mine. I was having a very bad day on Wednesday, and I just asked the random group chat with my friends where there are 56 people, asked them, are there any good recommendations for a brain doctor? And 4 to 5 people replied to me immediately, which actually goes to show that they themselves are also open to sharing where they receive help and where they get help. And here, Princess Aurora, which is a friend of mine, he texted me saying that, did you go to IB, which is a mental health clinic? I originally wasn't planning to put a translation up there, but the thing is, Professor Tizard was like, he asked me, do you have kids? So I realized there could be miscommunication or misunderstanding in the way that the name's being understood. I do not have kids. It's a name for the mental health clinic. And then he asked me, 혹시 병원 다니는 게 비밀이 아니라면 동아리 병원한테 썰 풀어도 되나요? So he's being also very respectful of me going to the hospital. Like, is it a secret or not? And furthermore, there's also this idea that's not something that's so heavy anymore. You don't go there unless you're suicidal, because he's like, 썰 풀어줘. Just spill the tea. Like, what's the goss? It's like, that's the way we're handling it right now. So that I thought that was relevant to add in to the conversation. Hannah Montana, Miley Cyrus. Hopefully you guys know this person. So the reason why I put it here is that some people view Hannah Montana, some people view Miley Cyrus, but there is this issue where we don't view them together as a whole. So what I would like to say today is that the media narrative and the statistics do not reflect the realities of Gen Zs. And there is a disconnect where even if the media says it's taboo, is that what us Gen Z, is that the reality of what we are living through? Before I move on, I would, sorry. Yes. This is a chance that I would like all of you to know. So if there's one thing you have to learn in my talk, is these three words. Like everything else, not important, just this. It's gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss. Do you guys all know what this means, or would a brief explanation be needed? Okay, a brief explanation is needed. So what color is this font? Is it yellow? Is it green?
Green.
No, it's green. It's the lighting that's making you make it look like it's pink, but it's actually green. That's gaslighting. I'm deceiving you. I'm making you think it's green, but in reality it's pink. Gatekeep means I'm preventing information from getting to you. So if I have a very good information that perhaps could be president of the United States, I'm not going to be telling anyone because that's my secret. And girl boss, that means you're just bossing, but girl bossing just makes it more powerful. So we're girl bossing together right now. The reason why I'm emphasizing this is because this is a prayer that we chant to Jeff Bezos every single night so that we could be rich queens. But sadly, that is not the reality. So we're just gonna be slaves for this hyper-competitive capitalist society. So why are we concerned with mental health? Why are we concerned with praying to Jeff Bezos to be rich? Well, we need a good mental health to be productive members of society, to be good slaves. That's, shortly to be said. So we need to secure the bag. So the way I say it, secure the mental health, secure the bag. Secure the mental health, then you secure the bag. So I will teach you ways you can secure the bag. And look how it's Chanel, not a tote bag. It's because we're gonna girl boss, and nobody wants to girl boss with a tote bag. It has to be a Chanel bag. So ways to get help. First, private practice. Hopefully you know who this is. Eleanor Young from Crazy Rich Asians. She's probably in her mansion, I don't know, cleaning her jewelry. And as soon as I walk by, she's be like, I smell broke people. And that's probably gonna be me. And that's true because private practice is incredibly expensive. One session, 50 minutes could cost up to 10만 원, up to 15만 원. And if you're going to be very experienced ones, it could be up to 20만 원. And for us students, we cry over lunch meals that cost 8천 원. So that's like way out of our budget, unless my dad's like Jeff Bezos. Oh, that would be so nice. Next is church. I see this with the most respect. Gen Z, the young people, are becoming a lot more secular. So there is that shift away from perhaps getting counseling from church. So it's like, there's a niche. Some people like it, some people don't. So I think that's the best way to describe going to church. Next is university. It's a very nice building, isn't it? A great color scheme. There's bars to keep us safe from killing ourselves because we're not stressed at all in university. They don't overwork us. They give us good food. Good food. Everything's there. Nice small rooms with no windows. Amazing, isn't it?
Are you gaslighting us?
Gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss. You're being yassified, sir. Next is 청소년 상담 복지센터. I would describe the place as a 휴게소, which some places are very, very nice. They have nice toilets, I judge buildings by toilets, by the way. There's marbles and there's warm water coming out, good lighting to take selfies in. And then some 중에서 it's like a dingy gas station, so it all depends. Oh, also, 청소년 성당 복지센터 is actually run by the government, so it's like mostly free. Unless you're in like an unlucky area, then you have to pay like 10,000 won, but again, it's very affordable. So now that I've talked about ways to get help, I'll be talking about how you can apply for sessions. So this is for university. So for my university, you have to log in to the website, you have to search for services, and you click onto which hours are available. And you're like, oh yes, I will get therapy. I'm gonna be yassified. I'm gonna girl boss. To then you will realize you will be seeing this. Ooh, it's not as clear on the screen, but it all says 예약 불가, which means it's filled up. The slots are full. And it's actually quite a lot of slots there, and it's still not happening. And I'll just go from here to here. It means 화상 상담, which means the school actually expanded ways to access counseling through Zoom. So you don't physically have to go there. You could just do it online. So it saves time. And there's also that psychological element where you don't have to physically visit too. And the 예약 완료, the red one, means that you were too late. So how you would apply for the slots is at Friday 1 p.m. you would open up Navism. Hopefully you know what that is. It tells you the server time. And once Friday 1 p.m. hits, and then you have to click it. So it's like trying to buy a BTS ticket. I think this one will explain it very well. Yes. When it becomes 1 p.m., you have to like madly click it. But most of the times you don't get it because it's that competitive, because it's free. So it's good, but then a lot of people are also pushed aside because they cannot get the help they need. So this is a limitation of it. So we talked about university. So now let's talk about how to apply for sessions for 청소년 상담 복지센터. Before I delve more deeply onto how you can apply for it, I actually want to briefly talk about the 1388 전화 상담. It's actually different from a suicide hotline. This call is specifically only for people from age 9 to 24. You can call them whenever you feel stressed or when you feel like you don't have anybody to talk to and your parents are like nagging at you all the time. So you call them and be like, I'm so sad. And that's what the call is for. And the reason why I bring it up is because the country has been working very hard to diversify the way we access the call. So the light blue one, if you see over there, it has been quite stagnant in the use. It's like quite similar. But if you see here, the dark blue one is for cyber 상담, which means that compared to 2011, where it was 8.34, it's like 3 times more. It's like 3 times more. So I would say the government is definitely putting more effort into making sure that teenagers can access it as much as possible. And you know, like we don't use phone calls anymore. We text everyone, and they've been very smart on doing that. The next is, yes, so how you can apply for sessions. You can call them. I know it's hard. I know I talked about how we don't call, but you do have to call if you want to apply for counseling as compared to the1388 전화, which is what you call when you're stressed out, emergency hotline. Oh, it's not there, sorry. Yes, so the one that I circled is what you call. And then below that, you could see 117 학교폭력 신고센터, and there's also 디지털 성범죄 피해자 지원센터. The reason why I put it up is because I thought the website was very good in the sense that it's showing you that it's not just counseling that you have. If you feel that counseling is not working and you think that the police has to get involved or it's something sexual in nature and you feel that the police also cannot handle it, they are giving you those options. And if you look at the computer icon, which I underlined, 게시판 상담, it means you can also comment your problems onto it. So literally, you don't even have to text them. You just make an ID and a password and just log on there and be like, hi, I am sad. What should I do? So again, diversification of options has been working very well. The government is drawbossing very hard, I must say. However, one drawback of calling them and asking them for help is that they never call you back. It's like, you could tell them, hi, I'm like really sad and depressed. you would have to wait around 2 months to get a call back because it's free. Again, so university, it's like trying to get a BTS ticket. For this, you're just waiting. It's a never-ending wait. You could have killed yourself by then. Sorry, trigger warning, but you know, that is the truth. Like, you don't know how your mental health is gonna go after a certain time. And this is the statistic for the average waiting time by the 서울시 청소년 상담복지센터, which for 서초 and Gangnam-gu, you could wait up to 60 days, which is 2 months. And for Dongdaemun-gu, which is around 5 days. So there again is this varying levels of waiting time. And that's because each 청소년 상담센터 is run by the local government rather than the central government. And for me, I'm not from Seoul, so I had to wait, I think 3 or 4 months to get the call back. So it was very difficult. So people in Seoul, you're lucky. Like, you guys wait 2 months, I had to wait 3 months. So, you know, let's say you got the call back or you got the BTS ticket. Congratulations, you got the therapy, you're girl bossing, you're like securing the bag, but, and then what? This is what's happening. So the y-axis is not wanting to unalive yourself. Unalive yourself means you don't want to kill yourself. And then time spent in therapy. So as you can see, once you start therapy, you're like, oh, I'm so depressed. And then like, oh, I'm getting better, and you fall down. The reason why that happens is that because it's free for university counseling and for Center, is that there are limited time slots, because you can't give forever free therapy to everyone. So there is that time limit, which ranges from, I believe, 12 sessions. And if you're really lucky, 24 sessions. Some give you much longer, but again, that depends on how rich your local government is or how rich your university is. So that is a severe limitation of help. Severe limitation of free mental health. Yes. So now that I talked about how to access therapy, how how mental health is being perceived, how to access it, and the limitations of it, I'll tell you what kind of therapist you'll be meeting in university and in school. Hopefully you know this reference too. Some of you don't. Okay. You know what? I'm happy with this. Okay, so types of therapists. We have the baby, there's the leader, there's the potato, and there's the cook. It's pretty self-explanatory, I feel, but I will explain more. So the baby, they're very determined, they're very passionate, they're young, they're like, I will fix you. But a limitation of it is that they're inexperienced and you don't trust them and they may be easily annoyed. The thing is that I've been in therapy for around 7 years now. So if a new therapist comes in, it's like, you know when like kindergarten kids know like a teacher is like panicking, like they smell that blood a mile away. That's for me too. It's like when a new therapist comes in, I'm like, I see you. So it's like you don't trust them too much because the experience isn't there. And the reason why I say they may be easily annoyed is that I had an experience where at the Pukji Center, this therapist was like, we're 10 sessions in. Why aren't you getting better? I'm like, it's only because we're 10 sessions in. But again, that is the issue. Because she is running short on time, she's under this pressure to make sure I'm better by the time I'm out of it. Because there's this survey which asks me, how helpful was your therapist? Do you feel like you got better? But 12 sessions to 24 sessions isn't really enough to fix a person, because mental health, again, is a lifelong progress and a process. Next. Ooh, I actually want to say one more thing before I move on. You'll find the baby a lot at the Pukji Center because that's where people go to actually fill in their hours and get sick pay. So you won't necessarily find them in universities, but mostly at the Pukji Center. Yeah, I just wanted to put it out there. Yes, next, the leader. They will get your life together. You will feel so motivated. You're like, I will run the world. Like Jeff Bezos who? Like I will be the next, I don't know, Hyunjung Bezos. Like, I'll be like, yes. And then, but a limitation to the leader is that you may have trouble going alone, because if you see the graph here again, that person was there for you for 12 to 24 sessions. You feel like you got better. Like she or he was like everything to you because they were so supportive, but then it immediately ends. where are you going to go after that? You can't afford private practice. So we need her, but can we afford her? No. So it's like 그림했다. So again, this is a limitation to free therapy. Next is the staple. They do their job, you know, they get along with everything, they're comfortable, they're homey, you don't question it, they're just there for you. So if you get the potato, consider yourself lucky, because in the lottery, they're the best you can get. Next is the cheese touch. Again, I say this with the most respect because I didn't realize it was going to be a church institution. But, you know, they're very great if you're religious, because there is that religious element where you can connect with them and, you know, they pray for you and you can girl boss with Jesus. But a limitation is that you may get the religious talk. And the reason why I brought this person up is because I was talking about my sexuality with a therapist, and she was like, I don't agree with it, and I don't respect it, and I don't understand it, but we're just gonna leave it there. And we never talked about it after that. So I don't really mind like what their beliefs are, but in the space of therapy and counseling, I do not think it was the appropriate thing to say. So again, this is a limitation to therapy, free therapy actually, because they're, you know, in a way trained to only handle depressed and people with anxiety, but people with perhaps a more diverse spectrum of issues, they're not really necessarily equipped to handle with. Because I had a therapist that told me, you're like the most interesting patient I've ever seen. Like depressed people, people with anxiety, they're just so boring, you know, it's the same thing over and over. But you're like a fresh breath of air. I'm like, thank you. Okay. So yes. Anyways, after that, so we are getting the therapy we need. Is it the best? Questionable. We are getting the help. Is it the best? Questionable. But what are we missing or too much of? So let's move on to part 2. What is still missing? This is me that I like. So I talked about therapy and ways to access it, and that I would say is mostly for adults who have autonomy, who can work. So you know they could call the institutions by themselves. But there is also Gen Z who are still high schoolers or middle schoolers who are still under their parents, and I think that perhaps their voices should also be represented here, which is that even if we believe in certain ideas, the parents may have different ideas of misconceptions of the way mental health is understood. So parents are like stuck with this, ooh, pills, therapy. Sometimes they don't even understand what both of them are. But for this talk, I'm actually going to be talking about the destigmatization of mental health, but the consequence of the oversimplification of it. So this meme I personally really like. So there's this tank that's being exploded. There's academic stress, anxiety, depression, low self-esteem. And the parents are like, ooh, how should we fix it? Slap some pills on it. But what happens after that is, that's because it doesn't address the underlying issues that actually has to be. You know, it doesn't address the core issues. And I think that's the issue with pills, is that there is this perception that pills or therapy too is like a quick solution to issues that's going up in the brain, when in reality, it's not. And this thing too. So parents normally go for the medication because they believe it's a quick fix. And some parents actually don't really like therapy because they believe that it gives their children a voice, because they're processing emotions and they're learning how perhaps not so great the parents are. They can, you know, like pivotal and talk back to parents, like 싸가지 없다. So, you know, there is this clash between these two. But it could also be the opposite, where parents only allow therapy for children because it doesn't go on the record, whilst pills, medication, could be on the records and it could affect getting jobs. Yes, this is actually my favorite slide. When you see this slide, what's the first image that you think of? It's not a hypothetical question too. Like, what's the first thing that comes to mind? This is the 대치동 학원가. Okay, it was a hypothetical. Oh, stress, yes, stress. What else?
Torment.
Torment, yes, like depression, lots of hardships. But actually, when I see this, I thought of this. Ah, the final one's not coming up. No, could you please move back? Thank you. Okay, so this is what I think about because, again, there's this media narrative that depression rates are the highest out of OECD countries, but then antidepressant prescription rates are being prescribed at its lowest. But I question it because I know the digital moms, they carry like a big bag of like Adderall and Xanax in their bags, and they're like, oh, take one, take one, take one. And you know, it's not, perhaps it's a generalization, but there is a lot of experience with it too, because my friend, he takes antidepressants not because he's sad, but he takes it to concentrate. And he tells me he cannot study without the antidepressants. I also had another like a situation where I was tutoring this kid from Japan, and her mom was so against going to the mental doctor to get pills because she had ADHD. The moment the mom flew to Korea, she bought a jar of Adderall, and she was like, here. The funny thing is, the mom didn't tell the daughter that it was Adderall. She told her it was vitamins. So there's this weird situation going on where like parents are like against pills, but when they realize all the other moms are doing it for their kids to study, they're like, ah, then it's fine. So there's this weird situation that's going on where we accept mental health, perhaps we tolerate it, but then do we understand it? That is the question I think that is also being raised here. So finally, I talked about just now in the first few slides, the perception of how difficult it is to access mental health facilities. I would firstly say this could be outdated because it was in 2019, and considering how quickly South Korea moves, you know, it could be just simply outdated. If we think about the media, there's Professor Untitled. She talks about medicine, prescription, mental health very regularly. And then there's also this other talk that she has where she talks with celebrities. And once celebrities start opening up about their mental health, there is a societal shift where we begin to understand mental health and we see it differently and in a less taboo manner. Yeah. And then, so what we need is, oh, no. Could you please go back? One more. Thank you. So what we need is pills and therapy together, understanding it, plus empathy. So I think that's how we could be a happier society. We need that synergy effect where, you know, it's not just pills, where it's not just therapy, or it's not just, you know, a quick solution. What we need to do is have a better understanding of how they work and have some empathy for others. Thank you so much for listening. Yes.
So I'm going to begin. Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Hyunjung, and today I will be talking Gen Z, if you know, you know, and the concept of adapting or dying amongst the Gen Zs in Korea. Right, so I'm just going to write a narrative with this character called Person A. Just keep this person in mind as you listen to the presentation. Just to give you some context, we're going to say that this person is 22 years old. And is working 2 part-time jobs and is hoping to enter university. So she's a little bit late to the game, but yes, that's where she is at right now. So adapting or dying. The reality of Gen Zs that students are living through today is that there's a lot of interesting phenomena going on. One of them especially being with lifestyles becoming trends. So in Korean media, every year, and not just media, but we get a lot of books, right? Telling us that, oh, for 2022, this is going to be the trend. This is going to be your consumer behaviorism. This is how you're going to react to things. And one of them that I really, and a lot of students and also professors read before the new year starts is the Millennial and the Gen Z Trend 2022 book, in which, oh, yes. Right, so they predicted 5 types of media trends, one being the metaverse narrative, the TTV, which is Twitter, TikTok, and all those social media platforms. And then 무기한 무경제, so that's just limitless economy, the ESG, environmental, social, and governance, the importance of that, and last but not least, the employee experience generation. So in here, I'm going to explain the employee experience a little bit more because I think that's interesting. What's happened is that when you're an employee, right, as you prepare for a career, you're not just looking into getting a job, but instead now you're building a character that's suitable for the job. So once you get a job, you're in there, you're making blog posts, right? You're making an Instagram account. So not only are you just doing day-to-day papers, here you have to be a person that is quite presentable. And also companies take very big pride in these employee influencers. And they actually use this to also attract other newcomers. Another interesting media trend that was really a big thing last year was the body profile media trend, where a lot of students, and not just students, but also people over their 20s and in their 30s, were taking photos of their body profiles after doing extreme dieting, and then also paying a lot of money to get into these studios. And also, I think one of the golden rule was that you couldn't drink water 3 days before the shootings because you had to look skinnier. The problem with this especially is that Gen Zs, as youngsters, they're very easily affected by what they see in media. And because this is a trend, before even looking into, perhaps the eating disorder links to this trend, they would just jump on it and then later have to suffer through with not much follow-up really provided. So another thing was the pukki. This is the multi-persona. This is the biggest thing in Korea right now. So if you know Yoo Jae-suk, then he's our #1 celebrity. Yoo Jae-suk has been seen doing different characters on TV, showing them that just Yoo Jae-suk himself is not enough. And this kind of narrative has also been playing into our age and the Gen Zs, where we're making a main account on Instagram, right? We're also making a private account for our friends. And then we're making a work account. So this is what we want to show companies. This is what we want to show our colleagues. And then last but not least, we have a different persona account. This is especially important for Gen Z and especially university students, as one of my professors have said, because the curation in media, right? We're all just being shown a certain part of it because of these algorithms. It's important that we build another character so we're able to sort of get in touch with a different life that we're not aware of, because that's required in jobs, because we can't just see one perspective of things. It's quite tiring. Right, and you might think, aren't these just mere media trends, right? What has this got to do with Person A, this Gen Z, if these are just trends? In fact, do you know all what your MBTI is? This has been a crazy thing in Korea where, when you meet someone, they're like, no longer are they asking you about your blood type, but they're like, what's your MBTI? Yes, just in case, for those who do not know what it is, so it's the Myers-Briggs type indicator where they ask you several questions and they divide our whole population into just 16 personalities. They see whether you're introverted, you're extroverted, whether you're sensing or if you're intuitive, if you think or you feel, or if you judge or perceive. Now, the thing about the MBTI that has really interested me in Korea especially is the fact that it's everywhere. In job interviews, they're asking you about your MBTI. There's a lot of talk about this, whether that's appropriate or not, but that's for another time. Celebrities are also revealing their personalities and their MBTIs at the same time. So they're like, if you have this MBTI, then you're like this celebrity. It's on Tinder, it's on these social platforms. People are introducing themselves with their MBTIs. In product promotions, it's especially the marketing industry is really into the MBTI and marketing to the E's, the I's, and they're dividing all these different groups of people. And there's also video content. So a lot of YouTube content is surrounded on the MBTI. The problem with this is, personally with my experience, is that usually I get a 55% introverted statistic and I usually am 45% extroverted. But on a really bad day, perhaps when I've just fought with a friend, perhaps, I go on my MBTI and I try it again and I'm angry, right? So I'm just like, no with hanging out with people. It's like, no, I do not want to go to parties. I just want to stay home and just keep to myself. And at the end of that, what happens is my introverted level just goes 80%. So it really takes over my whole, the whole spectrum, right? So what happens is that, yes. So if I were to go to Album, which is a job recruiting site, they actually look for very passionate MBTIs. This is how specific they're getting with the MBTIs lately. And so as a Gen Z, I'm like, do I have to lie about my personality? Should I be adjusting myself to be this person? It becomes very confusing. And also because the MBTI isn't really stable in the responses you get, again, there's a lot of questions behind that. Right, so Gen Zs need to be very over-reliant on these media trends, right? This is even more so because of our extreme digital connection, which you're probably aware of. You just walk into a classroom and everyone's on their phones. Kids grow up with all this technology, social media, even though you have to be 19, everyone's just putting their parents' numbers or whatnot and getting accounts. Another thing is that we're extremely sensitive to current trends. And this is not just for Korean Gen Zs, but I feel like it's for, Gen Zs everywhere because we're young. And also, but this is also quite specific to Korean Gen Zs too, because Hanyang University is a research center that only covers people in their 20s. And what they said was that the MZ generation, right, are the micro trends that the MZ generations make, in fact, actually becomes the main social trends within a year. Meaning that if it's just amongst us Gen Zs and if it's something we feel is important, we promote it enough that it becomes mainstream. That's how much it's affecting us. So to put it into a little bit more of perspective, a 50-year-old and a teenager, right? If you were to tell a 50-year-old you have to become an E over just the span of a day, you're pretty sure of who you are. So you keep to this I am me narrative, whereas teenagers are usually still figuring out who they are. So if you were to tell them, perhaps you should be a little more extroverted, they might be like, perhaps that's why that I should change. And teenagers, we still need approval from other people, whereas 50-year-olds are more of like, man, I'm me. I don't really need other people to verify the person that I am. So in this case, again, it's the Gen Zs that are constantly going onto social media, looking for likes, looking for approval. But wait, there's more. So it's not just the media trends that all these Gen Zs have to follow, but there's obviously the fixed standards that exist within Korean society. A lot of it's especially the lookism. This is, you see this on media all the time, but it's just all these shows that have been on Korean Netflix recently have been really tuning into one type of beauty standards. And it's not hard to miss, it's the pale skin and it's the skinny body. Again, with the body profile trend too, you can see that there's a certain body that we're all trying to aim towards. Not that it's a bad thing, but it's just if everyone is trying to be someone that they're not, whether they think they want to or not, I think that might be quite a problem, especially for young people. And not only that, but job application. So this is a lot of information. I'm just going to summarize it for you. But basically, according to the Korea Employment Information Center, probably, what they said is that most people want to get into finances, right? They want to become doctors, lawyers. And this is the same with what parents believe in. So this statistic that parents also, if you are a lawyer, here you can see that if you were to be working in the hospital industry, right, you most recommend it to your kids, 40% of them would recommend it. Whereas if you're going to more of the productive on-site work, you would say only perhaps 12% would say yes, you want to recommend it. So there's that idea that there's only a very certain amount of job occupation that we parents and kids want to aim towards. And finally, last but not least, education. Again, this is a very fixed standard that we all know of. So if you look here, the share of adult population aged 25 to 64 years old who completed tertiary education in South Korea in 2020 is high, which is a huge number when we compare to other OECD countries. And it's all these media trends that we're trying to follow. The look that we're trying to follow, it's that job occupation that we're all trying to get into. And on top of that, it's the education, which usually takes up most of our time because obviously you know how rigorous it can be. Right. Right, so yes, Gen Zs are pressured to follow both trends and these standards. But the problem is that these trends change monthly or sometimes even daily. You can see that on media. Oh, this new MZ trend, this new Gen Z trend, this new consumer behaviorism that's rising. And yeah, so Gen Zs have to now be aware of these trends online and everywhere too. So if you're buying something, you have to be very socially conscious of what you're buying. If you're going to find a job, you have to find a job that's right to your character. If you're trying to apply for a job, it's the same thing. You have to be this person that perhaps may not be you, but that's something you have to work towards, whether it's getting experience through different hub-ons, or if you're trying to get different perhaps the IELTS and just different tests like that. Right, so would person A be able to keep up, right? This person that hasn't just gone to university yet, 22 years old, working 2 jobs. And would you be able to keep up with this type of timeline? The question is, what happens to those who can't? Because that's a lot to carry. Does society offer an alternative solution for them? Sort of. So when I say sort of, whenever there's a failure or hardship, especially in media, shown in media, what happens is it usually ends in suicide. And I feel like examples in media, and I'm not saying that these dramas were bad for portraying them in a certain way, but in True Beauty, when a student was feeling ugly, she thought she was too ugly and she attempted suicide. Luckily, there was someone there to stop her. For bullying, again, in Save Me, this extreme bullying, what could the student do? Commit suicide. And last but not least, the victim of a crime, of sexual abuse, what happened to this character? Yes, again, she tried to commit suicide. So there's this, the Ministry of Health and Welfare did a research from 2018 to 2019, and apparently 99 out of 118 episodes that contained suicide scenes actually depicted suicide as a solution to a problem. And you can see, especially if you're at a younger age, you can see how that can completely influence you, because once it's out there, it's on Instagram, it's on Facebook, everyone's talking about it. The problem is, though, that even after these attempts, right, even if they survive the attempt, what happens is that either they meet the love of their life, so then suddenly someone rich comes along and they take them on this great journey, or they're offered a job from a really big company, right, which usually doesn't happen in reality. Or, they move to the countryside, or they check into a facility. Again, these are options if you do have some savings, but in reality, all these things you do have to have some amount of money to afford. So they're not very realistic, especially for Gen Zs to be able to follow. Right, so going back to person A. So this person wants to go to university. Again, is inexperienced in jobs. Doesn't really match the K-beauty standards. Let's say that this person's family also doesn't have a lot of money, has no connections to get this person into a job, and also no time in general because they're working 2 part-time jobs to get by. And also no story to tell. In the media narrative, this person can't build up anything because they can't really afford to do that. And the reality that person A faces is that if you look here, these are state enterprises. So if you see the number 17, what that means is that 17 enterprises in 2020 didn't hire non-university students. So if you graduated from high school, 17 of them didn't even look at you. Out of, I think that's 36, so that's half that are just not looking at you as an option at all. Another thing is that the wage gap. So a lot of people ask, why do Korean people, or why do Korean students especially only try to aim for the top 3 companies? The reason is that most of these big conglomerates, the wage that you're getting is just half of what you're getting from these conglomerates, and sometimes it's not enough to raise you and your family. Depending on your financial situation, it just may not be an option to go into perhaps a more, I say, a more smaller enterprise, although that's an option. Right, so person A. If this person had to either live in the current reality or commit suicide which is because that was what was offered on the table, what do you think person A would have done? To adapt or to die? So I attempted suicide. That was actually my story. Luckily, I survived. I think that it was just at that situation, I felt like I didn't have any other option. Despite there being help out there, I wasn't able to reach out. And what was really interesting about my experience is the next day I woke up and everything was completely back to normal. It was just day-to-days. The only thing that had really changed and the solution that was given was from myself. you know, there's this constant gamble with death that I started playing. So it's like, oh, how bad could it get? Because, you know, the worst solution out there is death. What's shown in media as my option out there is, right, so in media, it's like the only option I have out there seems to be death. Nobody seems to be accepting all the other solutions. In a hyper-competitive society like Korea, especially, this just isn't limited to myself, right? The Gen Zs especially choose death, which is why you see all these OECD suicide rates. And I'm not saying that it's the majority that's doing this, but it's that most of us feel like there isn't any other options out there. And really, should that be the solution, right? To have to go back and forth from just playing with death all day to day, should that be an option for them? Now, just to recap on the pressures on Gen Z of what I've been talking about, yeah, so again, beauty standards, you know, you having to understand the media platforms because Korea is #1, you know, technology, having to just up your specs, so doing extracurricular activities in university or in school, you know, keeping up with recent trends, these media trends, because you have to be in line with what's happening around you. You have to have a unique personality. You have to have a story to tell. You know, you have to get into a good career. None of the ones on the bottom are an option. You have to be likable at the same time. Not only that, you have to save face, what you call Hyunjung in Korean, and you also have to achieve good grades on top of that, and hopefully not make any mistakes in the process. So to adapt or die. You know, thinking back, I think that it was not the lack of really mental health options out there, but it's really the lack of options available to me that really devastated me. The idea of I could reach for help, but you know, even if I did reach for help, what could I do after that? One thing that can put this into perspective is university dropouts in Korea and university dropout overseas are seen very differently. So, you know, if you were to tell your parents in Korea, oh, I want to drop out in your second year, your parents would probably say, try, you know, just like maybe take a few classes out and start a job, but don't drop out. They will try to make you stop, refrain from dropping out of university. Whereas overseas, you were to tell someone, I think I found a new passion. It's not education, it's not in my studies, but it's somewhere else. You know, people around you might encourage that. I also, this is just an example, but you know, if Bill Gates had Korean parents and they're in Korea right now, and Bill Gates told his parents, I'm going to quit school. You know, I wonder if he could have just easily been like, yes, I could get away from the education and follow my dreams, perhaps, but maybe also not. Right, so what's accepted now in Korea is a very small bubble. You know, it's Sky University, it's Samsung, it's LG, you know, being a doctor, being a professor, being a lawyer, working in Kakao. And there's more in this tiny box, but still it's very tiny. And what I do think that should be accepted is everything, right? If you want to work, if like me, if you want to work just 2 part-time jobs, and if that makes you happy, right? Why couldn't have that been enough for me? You know, if I wanted to be just a kindergarten teacher compared to a professor, both are great jobs. Why do we have to weigh one from another? You know, there are a lot of options out there. If you're a movie junkie working at a movie theater, why does that have to be sort of compared to? Why are we all put in the scale? Right, so I think that there has to be a bigger range of really what is accepted in Korean society, especially for the Gen Zs, because I feel like that's really what's going to help them start to be able to connect with society more, and also perhaps we can lower the suicide rates. It's just a little hope that I have. Right, so to adapt or die, I think that narrative really has to change. And finally, I think it should be just adapt or miss, right? You know, you should do what feels right for you. And yes, thank you so much for listening. I was going to
Wow, thank you. Very good jobs. Well, Nix, what was it you said about some kind of Christian organization or something? You got here and you were worried about saying something about pastors.
Oh no, I just didn't want it to seem disrespectful to.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
We're all good. Question time. I have so many questions, I don't know where to start. How about you? Are there any questions in the chat box?
Yes, there is.
Okay, let's get one of those.
Sure. Elena Chan has asked, why don't you start accepting each other first among Gen Zs themselves? Any grassroots movement?
Did you get?
Oh, yes.
Which one of you wants to entertain that? Come up here. Sihyun is going to do it. Nix is going to do it. All of you are going to do it. Come and get a little closer.
Oh, yes.
Because you're talking there.
Oh,
Don't worry about that. Don't worry about that.
I think that one reason it's harder for Gen Zs to accept each other is because in media we're constantly divided into different types of groups of people. So with the MBTI too, and it's also with all these trends, it's hard for us to accept each other when we compare ourselves. And I think that, you know, as younger generations, it's hard for us to bridge that conversational gap because we are young and we sort of need that bridge, someone to bridge that sort of two distances. Sorry, I can't think of a better way to say that. But I think that it's hard for young people to start sort of that kind of connections.
Yeah, so the idea of accepting each other, I think, also comes from accepting oneself. So in Korean society, I'm actually writing an opinion piece on it, is that I don't think Korean society is that easy for like young people to find themselves and explore themselves because, you know, in high school, you're like, oh, 입시 준비해. And then in 대학교, it's like, oh, you have projects to do like me. And then you're like working if you're poor like me. And then you have to do like 학회, and then you have to do 동아리, and then you have to play at the same time. It's like, there's not much opportunity to accept yourself. So if you don't have that space for yourself, I question, how can you have that space to accept others? So I think Korean society itself has to be a bit more relaxed before we can actually start this movement towards accepting other people too.
Oh, sorry, just to add on to
Yeah,
what
go
you
ahead.
were saying, yeah, it's also because the meritocracy-based educational system in Korea, we're sort of taught to compete with each other. So when you're making friends, parents are making you aware of who you're making friends with, you know, which classes you want to get into, which school you want to get into. And I think in that process, what happens is we start seeing each other as competitors and not friends. And I think that also sort of really puts a distance between one another.
It's been that way forever. I'm in my 50s and it's been that way forever. It's nothing new. So you gotta start somewhere. I don't know. So what are you suggesting? Someone else? Other people, society, they have to work for you. You know that Korean society hasn't changed really. So what do you have in mind as a solution or of multiple solutions? What do you suggest?
Okay.
Let me just break.
Think a little. That's okay.
I've been thinking opening up more about it. I think that although, yes, Koreans have, you know, this has been an apparent problem, but it hasn't really been the Gen Zs that have been opening up about their experiences. So it's usually in media that we see these experiences being explained through celebrities. And I think with my speech today and also with what I could be doing in the future is perhaps using SNS as a platform amongst Gen Zs to show that it's okay to not be competing with each other. And perhaps that's not necessarily, you know, like the bandagry of, oh, it's just going to change from that. But I do think that that's where we should start.
Good idea. Mm-hmm.
Says, why don't you start accepting each other? I think we are accepting of each other much more than the previous generation. It's not as much as we hope it to be. I think that's one thing that we have to be clear about. And as she mentioned, like social media, it opened up such a diverse range of conversations up to top. Some good, some bad, but you know, it definitely opened up this like platform for other people to speak up. So like on YouTube, we can search up like, I think Sutuning is a new YouTube channel that opened up. It talks about sex and like safe sex really. And then there's also like gay platforms where like they talk about gay lifestyle. So there is a lot more diverse talk going on. I think the problem is that we don't talk about it day-to-day life. So we see it on the media, but is it happening in real life conversations? I think that is still yet to happen.
So there should be people, more people like you who have awareness of what's going on and seek help, not only as an individual, but for each other. So, and with each other. It's because what you said is what I was feeling all along when I was your age or even before. I was afraid of seeking mental health help because I have undiagnosed depression all my life, but I was worried about the same thing. If I actually consulted someone who was going to medical school at the time, and he said, he's a doctor, and he said, it's better for you not to talk about it. If you want to find a job, don't talk about it. So I didn't. And after I came to the US, I sought some help, but I eventually found it was useless. I can talk, but it never, like, it's a lifetime, basically. It's a process, because you don't change. I'm not crazy, but you have your issues, so you have to deal with it. And with amongst friends, maybe if you're religious, through religion or family members, but then family members have to be also open. If they are worried about other people and other people's, then they can. And it's, you're right. It's very hard to be yourself in Korea because there are so many, all these eyes constantly. You have to compare yourself. I mean, that's true in all other societies too, but it's more extreme in Korea. And so it's very hard to stand up for yourself and claim that I'm me, and so I'm not going to care about what other people think. You can do it to a certain degree, but unless the society changes, it's a very severe uphill struggle, and you all know that. So hopefully you guys can help each other seriously, because my generation didn't help. I remember someone who was hyper competitive, and this person didn't become my friend. And when she offered, this was in high school, and one day she wanted to have lunch with me, and I was very surprised. Why? And she wanted to know what my score was at the last exam. And then there was just such a profound disappointment. And then when we went to college, we happened to went to the same department. I really hated it. I didn't want her to go with me. And then she talked about me, my family background, behind my back. So all these other classmates knew about me before I had a chance to talk from my point of view. And it just, so I can't forgive her. Maybe I should forgive her, but even after 30 years, I don't wish to talk to her because she's very that kind of person, and I know she hasn't changed. It's very sad. So hopefully, things will change, and you guys, thanks for the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your questions.
Thank you. Anybody in the room with a question? Yeah, Leslie, go ahead.
To expand off of that, you mentioned, Michelle, that a lot of times it seems in the media that either you go this one particular way or the only way out of that sort of lifestyle is suicide. With changing stories such as dramas or other stories, webtoons perhaps, so that it would open up into like, oh, well, this sort of fast-paced lifestyle didn't suit this person and they didn't go to suicide, but they like went and, I don't know, opened up a coffee shop in Nonsan, something like that. Do you think that would be beneficial? Would that make any sort of difference, do you think?
I think that would definitely help viewers, especially once they see that there's hope after. But I've always thought about, with media, how much of reality should we be portraying in these, different dramas and entertainment shows. And I think that for the story, perhaps there is a limit to what can be shown. But I do think that like the educational programs, or not only just that, but it's just like Penguins, and all these characters and YouTubers. I think that's where we can really start first, and then perhaps then expand into media.
Is there another question in the chat box? Let's do that, and then Sam will go to you.
Okay, it's by Nicole Jody Shipton. Thank you to both speakers for sharing their very personal stories. I wonder how the male voice would play in this too. Hyunjung in particular mentioned various services available for counseling. Are there any group therapy session available? And is anger management, with quotation mark with it, session something that is practiced here as a type of therapy?
Okay, so for the male voice, I don't think I could talk about it because I don't know enough about the male area because I'm a female. But for anger management issues and group counseling, a professor who actually gave me therapy at the 청소년 상담 복지 center recommended it to me, but it's not free. So it's like, I just remember it being very expensive. So there are options. It's just that if it's not just about depression or anxiety, like the normal stuff, outside of that, I think you do have to pay for it.
So what you're saying is the access is limited because of that.
Yes.
So that would make it difficult for many to get to. As far as the male voice, maybe we have another session coming. You know, you have some Gen Z males in your classes. Yes.
But I would say that the Gen Z experience, with the adapt or die concept, I think that's pretty much probably the same. It's with beauty too. I think that with lookism, we usually focus on women on that aspect, but really it's obvious, it's all over. So.
Sam, go ahead.
So I wanted to congratulate you both on fantastic presentations, and I hope you'll give more presentations. And actually, I'd love to invite you to my university someday to talk. But I was curious because you mentioned earlier about the media sometimes misrepresenting things a little bit, and there was a big headline I think last week about how the Human Rights Commission was saying that LGBTQ situation was really terrible. And I was just wondering if you could comment on that at all, and if there is some positive things on that side that maybe that the media is not talking about, that things might actually be getting better, or would you say that report was entirely accurate? I know that's a hard question, but
So
I'm hoping that there's a good side as well to that.
I would say I have a very limited view on it because I haven't grown up in Korea, so I don't really know how good or bad it is, but I could comment on like my university experience. Is that okay?
Sure.
Yeah, so within my university, there's actually a LGBT rights council. And she's an ally there too, because we needed a design expert, because none of us are design wizards, I don't know. But yeah, we needed help. For the past 3 years, we didn't get authorization to act, to advocate for LGBT rights, because a lot of them have been online for voting. So there was that element of anonymity. And there has been struggles on advocating for LGBT rights. And like Professor Chizard mentioned about how like perhaps rather than trying to get permission from them, so the whole student council, we could move as an independent actor. But then again, I do think that there is pressure on that because we don't have that perhaps barrier that could protect us. That's the label of LGBT Rights Council. I'm the president, I'm the vice president of this council. If we don't have that, I think that is like our final perhaps 방패 from like the harshness of society. Yes.
Thank you.
Is there another question on the chat box?
No, there.
Okay, yes, go ahead.
But sorry for my voice, it's probably at the moment. I really enjoyed the talk. It was so interesting, especially for someone of my age. It's really fascinating. So I really agree with a lot of the things you were saying about social media really putting a lot of pressure on young people. And personally, I do think it's mostly a negative, influence on people's mental health. But there's one thing that I've noticed from my personal experiences recently, is about visibility of your friends' mental health. So specifically, I've seen maybe 2 or 3 of my friends in the last 2 years maybe have psychotic breakdowns, in the space of their Instagram stories. You can see them posting out of character content and things that are really quite worrying. And in one case that was, in the 24 hours prior to him going missing and then being found again, thankfully safely found. But you can see the visibility of people's problems, the people that you know, or maybe, you know, people who are just acquaintances. And I was just wondering if you think that's a good thing or whether it's a bad thing that we've got to that point that people are resorting to social media.
Thank you for your question. I think that's one that's really hard to answer because. Do you have some? Oh, yes, sure. So personally, I would think that to be able to express yourself to that extent is a good thing because it's not something you want. It's not something that should be necessarily hidden, but there's also that factor of what happens to the people who are also seeing it at the same time. How could that affect them? I wish I had like a solid answer for you on that, but I feel like there are both good and negatives on that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think I'm gonna
positive in terms of awareness, but also the people that see those stories are not necessarily the closest friends.
Yeah.
Could have impact on other people in the
Yes, go ahead, please.
I wonder thanks so much for fantastic presentation. I wonder in your opinion, what would be the strongest force to make mental illness more approachable and easy about? Is it media? Is it powerful influencers? Is it celebrities? What do you think could be the strongest force that open up about this?
Oh yeah, so for 청소년 상담 복지 center, which I talked about, they actually shifted their strategy in terms of the way they market themselves. So it used to be, if you're depressed, if you're anxious, come to us. It used to be very dark, but then they shifted it into like pink, cherry blossoms, like have a chat with us. Like they tried to shift the tone to make it more casual. And as mental health like started to gain traction, I think the media and cable TV saw that there is a way to profit off of it. And this Dr. Young became famous, and a lot of children are coming, a lot of parents are talking about it, and definitely a lot of celebrities are also coming forth and talking about their mental health issues.
It's like a spiral.
Yeah, so it's like the domino effect, beginning to start. Yeah.
I think also, just to add on to that, I think it's very important that media does portray it. I think media has a lot of power in that, and social media too. But I also do think that they need to be guided by these mental health organizations just to make sure that the content they're letting out isn't going the wrong way.
That's one more question. Twice in a row. You think the fact that Korea is becoming so much more known because I think there are many countries like Europe or the States where people like to travel and they see, okay, here is a bit more accepted to talk about it, and they go back home and think, okay, this is how they handle it in like France. And this is, we can do the same. Do you think that influence is positive or the globalization? Or doesn't it matter?
I need to ask my brain to process it.
Just speaking for me myself, I'm not sure if I can speak for everyone, but I did grow up in an international school, and that did open up a lot of conversations. So coming into Korea, I do think I was much more open about where I was, just mentally or just whatever I was going through. So in that aspect, I think the influence is good. However, perhaps I think that some of my friends do feel pressured to show who they are when they're not necessarily comfortable with that just yet because of the global scene, because we're trying to catch up with that. So for them, perhaps it's not as positive, but in my experience, it has been.
For the question about globalization, it's a yes and no, because I have a lot of queer friends who are actually very open about mental health, but there are also like non-queer friends who are like not open about mental health. So I think it's about like sabasa really, because like certain groups they're a lot more open, and I think if you are in the queer community, they tend to be a lot more tolerant and open to newer ideas, whereas perhaps in other groups they may be a lot more closed off. So I think what definitely helps, as she mentioned, is just to talk about it, because once you start talking about it, other people feel that it's okay to talk about it, and as you mentioned before, it creates that domino effect.
Go ahead.
I was curious about when you described like the different kinds of social media use, creating an alternate persona. Then what would be the goal? Would you be looking for other people's points of view, or?
So for that, I think each account has its own identity. So first of all, my main account, obviously, it's just my main account, but sorry. With the multi-personas, one could be for what you want to show your job, like the job recruiters, right? So if you want to show a more intelligent, more get together side of yourself. So then you'd be like reposting posts from perhaps like the UN Council on Instagram and showing that you have those interests. Whereas if you're trying to build a character for your friend, no, actually, sorry, to answer your question, I think it's a way of finding yourself. So sometimes perhaps, you know, in Korean society, we can't really be the person we want to be. If it's just, you know, fashion-wise, or it's what you watch and what you want to share. So you would use these different accounts and these different personas to sort of show that. And that's not just necessarily with one account, because that may not be enough. But this is also just being anonymously available, like an available option to sort of show your interest. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the rise of the kid could also be like a symptom to how South Korea is still not accepting of different types of people, if that makes sense. So I think, as she mentioned, there's the work thing, but also like, let's say Professor Chisholm follows me. I don't think I would post a bikini picture of myself in like the Bahamas. I'm sorry. Or like, let's say I'm really into like alternate fashion, which is like also not that accepted in Korean society yet. So I think it's about trying to find individualism within a country that doesn't accept it so much. So again, the media narrative says that, you know, MT said it like 개인주의, but I don't think that is the reality, because what we live through is still not the case. Yes.
Hello. Can you ask, in Korea, is it common that employers will look on your social media? Yeah, with the 5 months. Oh,
Take your mask down and repeat that
in
question.
Korea, is it common that employers are allowed to look at your social media?
In Korea, is it common for employers to look at your social media?
It's not common yet, but it is definitely a culture where you go into an interview. If it's not like one of those more strict environments when you're not in there, if you're just doing like one-on-one in a cafe, they might ask for it, or they might. So I've heard this from a friend that I have who's working in the recruitment company. So what they do is unofficially, they would just look through your Instagram, because usually it's related with the name. So if there's a really good, if it's well created, that definitely does give you that within her company though. So that's not just for everyone.
All right, is there any, go ahead.
This is my question.
Yeah.
Thank you for the speech. As far as I know, a lot of the new generation, we gather information through social media. And as you mentioned on your presentation, there's a lot of things that are also negative from the social media. So what would be a method for the new generation to avoid those negative and keep the positive?
I think that was a question I wanted to include in my slide, but I couldn't find the perfect answer for. But I think it's to recognize that negative influence is being made for younger generations to be able to recognize that perhaps this is more harmful to me. So maybe in a post, I think if you're doing something perhaps a little more explicit, I think in other countries they show that in front of videos, but in Korea there's not that much of just warnings. I feel like media should not be taken down necessarily, but there should be perhaps just like a guideline to where this could lead to, where this could, yes.
Adding on to her point, I think education also needs to start getting updated, because I don't think media literacy is a part of the education curriculum yet. And if you look at YouTube, it's like, not for us, but for the younger generation, they are the YouTube generation where they watch very simplified videos. And, you know, as humans, we tend to gravitate towards watching things that are much more easier to understand rather than watching like videos of theoretical physics and string theory. It's like, we wouldn't do that. So it's like, in that sense, I think critical thinking could also be a factor in the way that schools teach children to not just take everything as it is, but to actually question, like, biases, or who wrote it and whatnot. I think that would be very important.
Well, thank you both very much. Really appreciate it. Being here, thank you those who joined us on Zoom. We appreciate you being here tonight. I'm going to ask you to stop the recording. Sure. And I have a few announcements.